June 6, 1944. 0 hour 16. 6 wooden gliders hurtle through pitch-black sky over Normandy. No engines, no sound. Just wind rushing over plywood wings. Inside, 180 British soldiers grip their weapons. They cannot see the ground rushing up at 90 miles per hour. The Germans guarding the bridge below hear nothing. Their cigarettes glow in darkness. Death is falling silently from the heavens. In 3 minutes, these wooden aircraft will crash within 50 yards of the most important bridge in France. The pilots will perform the most precise flying in aviation history, in total darkness. 10 minutes later, the bridge will belong to the British. The guards will be dead or captured. This is the story of how 6 glider pilots pulled off an impossible silent landing, how they delivered soldiers onto a target the size of a tennis court, and how they captured Hitler's bridge before a shot warned the invasion fleet. The first victory of D-Day began with a whisper. By spring of 1944, the Allied invasion of Europe faced a devastating tactical problem. 5,000 ships would land 150,000 soldiers on the beaches of Normandy. It would be the largest amphibious assault in history, but those soldiers would be trapped the moment they stepped ashore. 2 critical bridges over the Caen Canal and Orne River controlled the only roads leading inland. These narrow crossings were the key to everything. They were the gateway to France. If the Germans held those bridges, they could rush panzer tank divisions to the coast within hours. They would slaughter the invasion force on the sand before it could establish any foothold. D-Day would become the greatest military disaster in history. If the Allies destroyed the bridges to prevent German reinforcements, they would trap themselves on the coast. No way to break out, no way to advance toward Paris. The invasion would stall and die. The solution seemed impossible. The bridges had to be captured completely intact, seized before the Germans could detonate the demolition charges already wired to the supports. Before the Germans even knew the invasion had begun, the timing requirements were brutal. The bridges had to fall within 15 minutes of the first troops landing. Any longer gave the Germans time to blow the charges. Allied commanders studied the problem for months. Parachute drops would scatter soldiers across miles. Boats would be heard approaching. Every conventional assault gave the Germans time. They needed something entirely new, something silent. Major John Howard was not a typical British Army officer. He had started his military career as an enlisted private in the Oxford and Buckinghamshire Light Infantry. He worked his way up through the ranks by determination and tactical skill. He knew what ordinary soldiers could accomplish when properly trained. When Allied planners explained the bridge mission, Howard had only one question. Could gliders land close enough to storm the bridges before the guards could even react? The answer from every aviation expert was unanimous. Completely impossible. Suicide. Horsa gliders were fragile contraptions of plywood and canvas stretched over wooden frames. They weighed 3 tons fully loaded. No engines, no power, no way to abort a landing once released. Pilots simply cut loose from tow planes and fell toward Earth. Landing a glider at night required seeing the ground clearly. Landing within 50 yards of a target required broad daylight. Landing silently on a defended bridge in total darkness was certain death for everyone aboard. Major Howard did not care what the experts said. He had seen the impossible become possible before. He proposed 6 gliders carrying 30 soldiers each. They would release 5 miles from the target, glide in complete silence through the night, crash directly onto the bridges before Germans heard a sound. Senior officers laughed openly. The plan required pilots to hit a target they could not see, in aircraft they could not steer, at speeds that would kill everyone on impact. Howard asked for 6 months to prove it could work. High Command granted permission to try. What happened next would become the most precise military operation ever attempted. For 6 grueling months, Howard and his hand-picked men trained in complete secrecy. Royal engineers constructed exact replicas of both bridges in the English countryside. Howard's soldiers practiced their assault hundreds of times until every movement became automatic. They could clear the bridges blindfolded in darkness. But the real challenge belonged to the 6 glider pilots who would deliver them. Staff Sergeant Jim Walwork led the pilot training program. He faced a seemingly impossible task. Land a 3-ton wooden aircraft on grass barely 60 yards long, at night, without power, without lights. The pilots practiced relentlessly until their hands bled from gripping the heavy control columns. They flew approach after approach in total darkness. They learned to read subtle shadows on the ground. They memorized the exact angle of descent. Walwork developed a revolutionary technique that no pilot had ever attempted. He would dive steeply toward the ground to build tremendous speed. then pull up sharply at the last second. The glider would stall completely and drop straight down like a stone. The technique was violent, incredibly dangerous. The impact would destroy the gliders completely, but it would put his passengers within 50 yards of their target every single time. The pilots practiced until they could hit a small marked spot within 10 yards. Every single time. In complete darkness. Howard drilled his soldiers obsessively on speed. They had to exit the crashed gliders and reach the bridge in 60 seconds. Any delay meant German reinforcements. Any delay meant death. By late May 1944, the team was ready. Now they waited for the order to go. June 5, 1944. 2300 hours. 6 Halifax bombers lifted off from RAF Tarrant Rushton. Behind each bomber, a Horsa-glider carried 30 soldiers into the night. Major Howard checked his watch and said a silent prayer. The flight across the channel took 2 hours. The soldiers sat in complete silence in the cramped wooden fuselage. The only sounds were bomber engines ahead and the creak of wooden wings flexing in turbulence. At 07:07, the French coast appeared. Searchlights began sweeping the sky. Anti-aircraft guns fired at the bombers. But not a single German gunner shot at the gliders. No one could hear them. Walwork spotted the canal through his windscreen, a ribbon of silver gleaming in moonlight. The bridge was a dark line crossing it. He pulled the release handle. The tow rope fell away. Absolute silence engulfed the glider. Walwork pushed the control column forward and began his steep dive toward the target. 90 miles per hour. 100. The ground rushed up with terrifying speed. Walwork could see German sentries walking casually across the bridge, smoking cigarettes, completely unaware. At 50 feet, Walwork hauled back on the controls. The glider pitched up violently. Soldiers slammed forward, then gravity took over. The glider slammed into the ground at 0:16. The impact tore off the cockpit. Walwork crashed through the windscreen. Barbed wire wrapped around the nose, but the glider stopped 47 yards from the bridge. Within 60 seconds, Howard's men poured from the wreckage. Lieutenant Den Brotheridge led the charge. He sprinted across the bridge firing his Sten gun. The Germans had no time to react, no time to reach the demolition switch, no time to do anything but die or surrender. 10 minutes after the first glider hit, Howard transmitted the prearranged code. Ham and jam. Ham and jam. Both bridges were captured intact. The impossible mission had succeeded. The glider assault had been devastatingly effective. All 6 Horsa gliders landed within yards of their targets. The canal bridge fell in exactly 10 minutes. The river bridge in 15. Not a single Allied soldier died during the initial assault. Lieutenant Den Brotheridge became the first Allied soldier killed on D-Day. A German machine gunner shot him as he charged across the bridge moments after capture. He died knowing the mission succeeded. Now Howard's men faced a terrifying new problem. Hold both bridges until reinforcements arrived. 180 soldiers against the entire German army in Normandy. The Germans counterattacked within the hour. Tanks rumbled toward the bridges from inland garrisons. Machine gun fire raked British positions. Howard's outnumbered men grimly held their ground. At 01:30, aircraft filled the sky above. Parachutes began blossoming overhead in the moonlight. The British 6th Airborne Division was landing to reinforce the bridges. By dawn, the beaches exploded with the main invasion. Thousands of ships appeared on the horizon. The greatest amphibious assault in history had begun. Howard's force held both bridges throughout that endless, bloody day. German counterattacks grew fiercer. Casualties mounted, but the bridges remained in Allied hands. At 1300 hours, bagpipes echoed across the canal. Lord Lovett's commandos marched across to relieve Howard's exhausted men. They were 2 minutes late. The road inland was open. The invasion could proceed. The capture of Pegasus Bridge became instantly legendary. Military historians called it the most outstanding flying achievement of the entire war. 6 ordinary pilots had landed 6 gliders within yards of their targets, in complete darkness, without engines, without a second chance. The bridge was renamed Pegasus Bridge after the winged horse emblem worn by British airborne forces. The original structure still stands today beside the canal. A museum preserves it for future generations. Major John Howard survived the war and became a symbol of British courage. He returned to Pegasus Bridge every year until his death in 1999. Staff Sergeant Walwork recovered from his crash injuries. He had performed the most precise glider landing in aviation history. He lived to tell the story to generations of schoolchildren. The silent assault proved what ordinary soldiers could accomplish with extraordinary training. 6 pilots and 180 men captured 2 bridges and changed history. Every June 6th, visitors from around the world gather at Pegasus Bridge. They remember the brave men who fell silently from the sky. They honor the first victory of the longest day. The liberation of Europe began at 0 hour 16, with 6 wooden gliders and the courage to attempt the impossible.